All right, Mr. Harmless here. And we're going to do some practice with 30, 60, 90 triangles. And just like with the 45, 45, 90 triangles, there's some steps that you're going to see me do. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify the triangle because it's not always going to be a 30, 60, 90. You don't know which one you're going to get all the time. So you identify the triangle. Second thing you're going to do is identify the parts, right? And this one, you're going to identify hypotenuse, short leg, and long leg. The third thing that you're going to do is figure out what you're going to do, okay? Am I going to multiply or am I going to divide, right? It's got to be one of those two things, and then you got to figure out which number. And that's a hashtag to some of you, but for us older people, that's a number symbol. So it's either going to be times 2, divide by 2, times square root of 3, or divide by the square root of 3. And then once you do that, you need to actually do the work it out, and that includes any simplifying that you need to do, okay? So let's start with this first question here, and let me just box that off a little bit here so I don't confuse it. And you're going to hear me do these things as I'm working through it, okay? So I know that this is a 30, 60, 90 triangle because this is 60, this is 90. That would have to be 30 to add up to 180 degrees, okay? I then identify, notice this is the hypotenuse because it's opposite the right angle. This is the short leg. It's opposite the 30. And this is the long leg because it's opposite the 60. Okay. So I have the short leg. I'm trying to find the long leg, and I'm trying to find the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is twice the length of the short leg. So I know to find the hypotenuse, I'm going to take the short leg times 2. So my hypotenuse is going to be 6. Okay. So there is my hypotenuse. The long leg isn't twice the length of the short leg, but the long leg is the square root of 3 times the short leg. So to find the long leg, I'm going to do the short leg times the square root of 3. 3 times the square root of 3 is 3 square roots of 3. And so now I just found my long leg. Neither one of these numbers needs simplified. Things that you look for simplifying are if there's a square root in the denominator, or if you have a number that is inside the square root that is larger that could be divided by a perfect square. Okay, let's try the second example. In this one, I know it's a 30, 60, 90, and I know that this is the hypotenuse. I know that this is the short leg, and I know that this is the long leg. And if you're having trouble identifying these things, please ask for help on that. There's easy ways to identify things. I always start with the hypotenuse because I know that it's opposite the right angle. Short leg is opposite the 30. Long leg is opposite the 60. Okay. All right. So now I have the hypotenuse. I'm trying to find the short leg. Now, notice I don't have any way of finding the long leg from the hypotenuse. I don't know what that relationship is exactly, but I do know the relationship between the hypotenuse and the short leg. It's the number 2, right? Short leg is half the size of the hypotenuse. So I know that the short leg is going to be equal to the hypotenuse divided by 2. And 34 divided by 2, if I do that in my head, I think that comes out to be 17 over 1, right? 17. So the short leg equals 17. Now I need to find the long leg. And like I said, I couldn't find the long leg based on the hypotenuse, but I can find the long leg based on the short leg. The long leg is square root of 3 times larger than the short leg. So to find the long leg, I'm going to take the short leg and multiply it by the square root of 3. So the long leg equals 17 square roots of 3. Okay. So those weren't too bad. Let's increase the difficulty here a little bit. Got a square root in part of the problem to start off with. This x is my hypotenuse. This is my long leg. This is my short leg. So I have 2 things to find. I have to find the hypotenuse and the short leg. Okay, so if I go to find these things, let's see. I don't know what the relationship is between the long leg and the hypotenuse, but I do know how to find the short leg based on the long leg. The short leg is square root of 3 times smaller than this. So I can take the short leg is going to equal the long leg, 25 times the square root of 3, divided by the square root of 3. Now this one's easy because since there's a square root of 3 and here, I can cancel those out, right? So I'm doing some algebra here, and I end up with just 25 over 1, which means I can just write short leg equals 25. Now I need to find the hypotenuse. Now the hypotenuse, I can't find it based on the long leg, but I can find it based on the short leg. The hypotenuse is twice the length of the short leg. So the hypotenuse equals the short leg, which I now know is 25 times 2. It's double. So x equals 50. Okay. All right, let's try another example here. Third example. This one, again, like this one, starts with the long leg. The hypotenuse is one opposite the right, and the short leg is then this one. Okay, so I'm trying to find the short leg and the hypotenuse. So I'm going to start by saying, okay, well, let's see here. I know that the relationship between the long leg and the short leg has to do with the square root of 3. The short leg is square root of 3 times smaller. So that means I can say the short leg equals the long leg divided by the square root of 3. Now with this problem, notice that I have an issue here, and I'm going to switch to red because I'm switching into my algebra thought process. I have a square root in a denominator. I can't leave it there. So the way that we've taught you to get rid of that is by multiplying the numerator and the denominator by the square root of 3. This is not changing my value because technically I'm just multiplying it by 1, right? Square root of 3 over square root of 3 is just 1. But when I multiply it, it's going to look different. So square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is just 3, right? Square root of 9, which is just 3. The numerator, we get 24 times the square root of 3. I can do one more step of simplifying here because this 3 and this 24 can both be divided by 3. So I end up with 8 times the square root of 3 over 1, which means I can write my final answer here. Y equals 8 times the square root of 3. So there is my short leg. The hypotenuse, then, I can't find it based on the long leg, but I do know that between the short leg and the hypotenuse, it's double the size. So that means I can take the short leg to find the hypotenuse. I can take the short leg, which I now know is 8 times the square root of 3, and multiply it by 2. Double it. Okay? Now, when you're multiplying here, the order of multiplication doesn't matter, except that you can't multiply a number outside of a square root with a number inside of the square root. But I can do the 8 times the 2 to get 16 times the square root of 3. I just can't multiply these together to get some new number unless I want to get the decimal. So I have to leave it like that. All right, last 30, 60, 90 practice problem here is this one here. I have the hypotenuse. I need to find the short leg. I need to find the long leg. And I know there's one more down at the bottom, but I think I'm going to stop with this one here. And so for this one, I'm going to say, okay, well, let's see. If I have the hypotenuse, I'm trying to find the short leg and the long leg. Well, I do know that between the hypotenuse and the short leg, it's half the size. So I can take the short leg equals the hypotenuse divided by 2. This can be simplified because the 22 and the 2 are both divisible by 2, and I get 11 square root of 3 over 1, which is just 11 square root of 3. So there's my short leg. Now, between the short leg and the long leg, the relationship is the square root of 3. It's square root of 3 times larger. So to find the long leg, I'm going to take the short leg, 11 square root of 3, times the square root of 3. Now, I can multiply these square roots together to get the square root of 9, which is just 3. So I end up with 11 times 3, right? Square root of 3 times square root of 3 is just 3. 11 times 3 is 33. So I end up with the long leg has a length of 33. Oh, I've got time. I might as well do one more here. I have the long leg is given to me. This is the hypotenuse. This is the short leg. Okay. And so I can't go right from the long leg to the hypotenuse, but I can go from long leg down to short leg. It's square root of 3 times smaller. So I'm going to take 4 times the square root of 21. So this is what x is going to equal, divided by the square root of 3. Now in the 45, 45, 90 triangle video, I talked about this. There's 2 ways to do this. I'm going to do this way here. The easiest one in my head is that, well, since these are both in square roots, they can be canceled out, right, these numbers. So I know that this ends up being 4 times the square root of 7 divided by the square root of 1, which is just 4 square roots of 7 over 1, which is just 4 times the square root of 7. So my x, my short leg, is 4 times the square root of 7. Now, there's another way to do this. It takes a little bit longer, but it might be a way that you're more familiar with, and we can talk about that. But for right now, let's just leave it like this. Now that I have the short leg, I need to find the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse is double the length of the short leg. So that means to find the hypotenuse is y. Find the hypotenuse, I need to take the short leg, which I now know is 4 times the square root of 7, times, and since it's double the length, times 2. So when we're multiplying here, the 4 and the 2 can be multiplied together to get a new number, but I can't multiply that square root of 7 with all of them. So I end up with 8 times the square root of 7. So there's some 30, 60, 90 triangle practice. If you want to see the other way to simplify this, I can show you. Just feel free to ask, and I'll make sure that gets shown. If you have any questions besides those, let me know.